Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. Joe, nice to have you on the show.
Hey man, thanks for having me. Super excited. It's been a couple months since we chatted.
Yeah, and thank you again for having me on Show Me the Nuggets. That was a lot of fun. So it's great to have you on, and I know you're coming at this from a background in the agency space. You've exited multiple agencies. You built a software business and other businesses. So with that in mind, can you give everybody a little background for those that don't know you?
Yeah, sure. So I dropped out of college dropout, going to school, couldn't figure out what I wanted to do, knew it had to be in some type of internet marketing, so to speak. But back then, I was like 2007, 2008, like
Yeah.
it didn't exist, right? So the hot thing there was websites, right? Everybody knew that this online wave was happening. So, I dropped out of school and started picking up websites, like basically went to like a certificate type of program, supposed to be like 2 years long, completed it in like 8 months. Right before like I finished though, typical entrepreneur, like I'm like starting to question myself, starting to think through things like, is this really going to work? Did I just waste like the last 7 months of my life? Like, should I finish this? I'm on track. I could finish it in like a month. I'm like, let's go see like the commercial viability of this. So I'm like, let's go see if I can get some web design, web development contracts. And fast forward week two later, and I got $12,000 in contracts sitting in my hand. And I'm like, okay, shit. Like now I got to figure out how to fulfill. So fast forward then, like kind of giant leap, started doing marketing, started doing more the SEO side. I really like that. And then ultimately in 2012, I had a friend that was in the software and kind of more marketing and selling stuff and training to digital marketing agencies. And he bugged me for like 2 years, tapping me on the shoulder. Hey man, my crew would really like, my customers would really like your call tracking platform that you guys have in-house. Would you share that with everybody? Would you share your systems and processes? And I just told him no. And then he sent me a text message of a picture of a house. And I'm like, oh, is that yours? Congratulations. And he's like, yeah, I just bought it in cash with the course sales of selling this agency course. And I'm like, what the heck? Cash? So I'm like, all right, let's talk. Fast forward, we did a webinar together, crashed GoToWebinar, did $80,000 in sales live. And I'm like, okay, great. Like, this is really cool. Like the sales are crazy, great income opportunity, but like the thing for me is I've been helping agency owners or digital market or local business owners for so long. Helping agency owners was like really refreshing, right? Like because it was like the same person. I felt like we were cut from like the same cloth. It was like, oh my gosh, I've been looking for this call tracking forever. Thank you. Like it was just a different type of customer. So that's kind of it in a 500-foot view.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. So that makes a lot of sense. So you're basically, coming out of like an early career mode, back when, websites were getting big. You start the agency, you move into marketing. Can you talk about building that call tracking platform? Because I think a lot of the times, our listeners and people we talk to are you either using off the shelf stuff that doesn't do things well enough, or they build something on their own, or they start one of these projects and it falls apart. So like, what did it take to build that platform? What inspired that? And then how did you get it to a place where you could actually like put it on the market and use it for others and stuff?
100%. So yeah, I mean, we really scratched our own itch, right? And the itch there was like, it was really hard to go pitch our marketing clients that they needed to spend, $1,000, $2,000 a month just on call tracking on top of the services that they were paying us for, and then potentially on top of paying like for ad spend. And so it was a problem to sell, but we know that as marketers, we needed it to really do a good job and to be able to understand what's working and what's not, and be able to get them the results that they wanted. And so it was kind of this like adversarial relationship where it's like, I'm going to hold you accountable as the marketer to get the results, but I don't want to pay for that bill over there. Right.
Yeah.
And so like it just became a problem that like we had to figure out how to solve. It was a problem for months and months. And then we stumbled across Twilio, right? I'm on the web surfing one day. Twilio was like non-existent. Nobody knew who it
Mhm.
was. And like I found this programmable API for the telephone, right? And that's what they called themselves, a telephony API back in the day.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second, like phone numbers, I think they've come down a lot since, but I think phone numbers were $2 a month. And the usage at that point was like 2 or 3 cents a minute. And that was like anywhere from a quarter to a tenth of what I was paying, depending on which platform we were using at the moment for each client.
Yeah.
Light bulb, like, holy cow. Like this is crazy. If we could figure this out, like, it's game over. And at that point, we had like in-house, I wouldn't even say that they're software developers, more like web techs helping us build, very simple websites and things like that. And like we literally built the application in-house with one of those like web techs. I wouldn't even say that they were a software developer.
Right. That's super interesting. So it's almost like you already had this product validated because you're using it, spending many thousands of dollars on it for all these clients across the board for a long period of time. So it's like it's validated. It's not like you have to go out and test this new cockamamie idea. Like it's just
Yep.
straight up dollars and cents
Yep.
cheaper on a mass scale. So that makes a lot of sense. So from there, you kind of move on to this product, and then you mentioned kind of exiting several more agencies. When did that happen? Like how did that fall into the mix, and what were you doing there?
I found that I could build and scale agencies. It was a lot of work, but the payoff was pretty good. But when it got to a certain level of scale, and it took me a while to figure this out, but like I don't like running big companies, right? Like I just don't. I don't enjoy it. It's stressful for me. My last exit actually was last November, and it was an agency. So it was called Invisible PPC. We had like 35 full-time people all over the world, and like me, like management, like so much red tape. That's really difficult and not my cup of tea. So the first agency that I sold was literally just me selling a book of business, right? I built a web design company, started then getting into marketing. I moved from Ohio to South Florida. I couldn't like service those people face to face anymore. And so I made a deal with a local company for them to buy the book of business from me. And it wasn't like the company, it was just the book of business. And then I got a revenue share on top of it until like in perpetuity forever. So that was the first exit. With my second exit, it was a paper lead business, right? And so we're really selling like every business's like greatest dream, right? Like we're selling them the money out the other side, the lead out the other side, without them having to go through the whole learning curve of ranking a website or going through Google Ads and figuring out what's working and tweaking and improving. And the lesson that we learned is like we ended up having a lot of uneducated customers that always just wanted more and wanted it for less, right? And instead of being able to turn and say like, oh, well, Google's the enemy or the platform's the enemy, Facebook is the enemy, we were the enemy, right? Like, because
Uh,
we weren't doing it for them. We weren't helping them. We were just selling them the leads. And so what I found is we went from 0 to 83,000 a month or a million in ARR in 4 months. But just as fast as we were onboarding people, people were falling off the other side. And so
yeah.
we built some sustainability, but very quickly, like I learned, like, man, like I built this business that I'm not really having fun in, right? Like this is
Yeah.
hard work.
Yeah, that's a really interesting experience, and it kind of like begs a lot of questions that I think about sometimes. Where do you think that there's obviously such a thing as a bad business, right, on paper, and then there's such a thing as like a bad business for you emotionally as you as an individual, right? So if you're thinking about like that business, do you think it was a bad business in both ways, or was it just a bad business in like one of those ways? Is there somebody that could have just managed that retention and as a sidebar, there is that like heavy emotional cost of a low retention business, even if it makes sense on paper, right?
Sure, sure. So, I mean, I think we did build a group of core customers, right? That stuck, that paid every month, that always wanted more, that were good, never complained about price, always wanted to scale with us, like the unicorns in the business, right? But if I really stripped out the numbers, those were probably like maybe 30 or 35 grand a month in revenue. And like the rest of it, right? The other 2/3 or something like that came from customers that weren't long term, didn't have the mindset that I wanted, and really were problematic. So I think like yes, I could have scaled it back to answer your question, to that revenue, and like it would have done really well. But like I'm not really excited about an agency business at that level of revenue. That's to me, it's very volatile as well at that, because like I lose one customer and I could lose half or a third of my revenue.
And to sort of like think about before we get to what you did next. So you talked about exiting three different agencies, and one of them you built to like 35 FTEs before deciding, running the bigger agency wasn't your cup of tea. Can you talk about the stages a little bit? Like there's a lot of different opinions on like phase one, you're trying to get from X to Y and you have this many employees. Stage two is something else. Like what does that 35 number look like? Like what do you think happens when, and what's the point at which you're like, nope, I'm done? Like how would you describe those phases?
Yeah, I guess for me, I think I have a very different viewpoint of those phases than a lot of people. I think like for me, I figured out by being involved in these different agencies and buying and building and selling them, and one of them being a wholesale right business where we did white label fulfillment. Like it was wholesale business. I have a different viewpoint than most people do. I think that way too many agencies are too top heavy. They have way too many team members. Their markup is awful. Their margins are awful, and they don't really do that good of a job for their customer. So I think like from a leverage standpoint, there's a lot more that can be done to get better results for your customers and to deliver a better return on investment while you have less people to manage and deal with and worry about as well. So I think like, when you first get started, I'm very sales focused. That's what allows me to build these companies fast and to scale. I think first step is hiring an SDR. The way that you're going to get leverage is leverage on your time. I think the easiest thing that you can buy back that's a no-brainer is an SDR, sales development representative. And like if you're doing cold outreach or you're doing inbound, no matter what it is, like that SDR can take a lot of weight off of you, free up a lot of bandwidth. And then on the flip side, I think the first hire in fulfillment is somebody that probably is a little higher pay grade than just an SDR, but that can help you really nail your systems and processes. But from a leverage standpoint, right? Like how do I get the customer the best return on investment, but also like with me doing the least amount of work? And I think like everybody focuses on like, what's the 100 things that we have to do instead of like, what are the 5 that are going to move the needle? Right. And
Yeah.
like just do really well at those 5 things.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit. And first, to shamelessly plug us, we are looking to be a better, faster, cheaper version than the SDR. So anyway, that shameless plug out of the way. Thinking about Visible PPC, which I think if I have that right, that was the one you built to 35 employees. So obviously you've moved on to other stuff that is more compelling to you and so on since then. But let's say like you had the gun to the head, you had to build that agency again now in the year 2022. What would that look like? Like, are there things you would do differently to make it less top heavy or use technology, or like how do you think about that?
Exactly what you said. I think use technology, make it less top heavy. When that business got started, we were in a blue ocean too, right? Now it's a red ocean, right? So like how do you get back to blue ocean would be another big thought. And so for us, as an example, all that we did was Google Ads fulfillment for agencies, right? So we found is that became very commoditized, right? So we actually built software that does and gets a lot of the results that a person does without having to actually compete with any PPC manager or any agency, right? So the agency can slide in, sell a service, not look like an agency using software and AI, and actually get a better result. And they don't have to compete with anybody.
Yeah.
Right. So like that, think about value proposition is a win for the end customer. They don't have to fire their marketing agency. They don't have to fire the in-house marketing person, right? It's a win for the agency because they get to get a sale. They get to get their foot in the door. They get to build a relationship to hopefully cross-sell, upsell other services. And then like ultimately it's a win for us selling the software. And from a valuation standpoint, right? I'm playing a much different game selling software, right? And software multiples versus a services-based business.
And there's so many places to go with the software side of that. And the more people I talk to that have done really well in the agency space and then kind of moved on to other things, it's usually software, and it's sort of like because of the multiples, but the multiples are there because software scales better and it's so valuable and all the things that we know. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, how much do you feel like having that agency experience was necessary to build all this software? Like if you were fresh out of college or whatever, would you go into the software space, or do you still think you would have had to go the agency route first?
Build the agency route, man. I think like the fastest way to like 100 grand, 200 grand a year very leveraged, right? Freelancer agency, right? Is great because you get paid to learn, you get paid to understand the problems, you understand the marketplace, and then like going from there to SaaS, I think is a beautiful, beautiful transition because you understand the marketplace, you understand the problems, you can talk the language, you can talk the lingo, and you know the problems to solve.
Yeah, and it also seems like the push to software feels so much more intense because of the labor squeeze. But that that goes up and down. The labor market can change, but it's like the difficulty of finding really talented creative people and like retaining them in an organization is so tough that like anything, it seems like there's so much pressure going towards pushing agencies to develop technology or else find partners that can do it or something like that, as opposed to like retaining knowledge in an organization and keeping those people. It's like such a struggle.
I think retaining good people, no matter what, is always going to be a problem. I think that what impresses me when I look at fast growing companies is the small companies, right? That have, they're doing 50, 100 grand per employee a year, right? Like, and that's what I'm really interested in. Building long-term visions, long-term plays with long-term people, right? Like, because that's fun to me. Like, that's exciting to me. Like, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the guy runs like this morning show, and they're like, "Why would you commit to doing a morning show? Like, how do you ever go on vacation? Like that's awful. Like every single day, like you're doing this morning show." And he's like, "Dude, it's like the greatest thing ever. Like it's me and my four brothers, it's me and my four best friends, and every single day I get to wake up and shoot the shit with them and have like the best time. Like this is the best job that I could ever have." And I think like thinking about that and like what do you want to do and for the long term that you could sustain, I think is like really important, no matter if you're going to go in agency or in software.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it almost seems like it's such a choose your own adventure. And there's kind of back to the last thing that I was talking about, where it's like there's a business that's really good on paper, then there's a business that's really good for you personally, and then it's sort of like finding what matches those two things, right? So I think about that, like in terms of being a creative agency, like the classic model where it's like, we want every day to be fresh. We want to work with a different client, do a different project every day. That on paper is not a great business, right? Because you have to constantly reinvent the wheel. And it seems like you'd only want to do that if you honestly loved that process. But it seems like so many agencies do that, but they don't really like it, right? So yeah, any thoughts on that? Like, how do you kind of ride that line between making something that scales and can grow and works on paper, but is also enjoyable, I guess, if you're not a software builder, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you could go down the productized services route, right? Like there's other ways where you could, as an agency, really own a good business that isn't just one-time based. There just isn't always, the never-ending loop of new client, client finished, new client, client finished, right? I think a lot of people can keep up with that long term, but I think most people can't. And they look at them and they try to emulate their business model, right? And they don't think through it. They never take the time to really sit down and think, where do I want to be in 5 years? And so I think like the biggest advice that I give is like, just do more planning, spend more time thinking and like less time just doing and head down. And you'll end up having very drastically different outcomes, fast forward 3, 6, 12, 24 months.
Yeah, I love that. And I've been trying to kind of do a better job with thinking time. There's a great book that I've been plugging a lot called The Road Less Stupid, like Keith Cunningham. You know that one? But I'd love to hear like how do you plan? How do you think about things? Is there a ritual you go through, a process, books that have helped you, et cetera?
Yeah, that book is fantastic. I recommend it all the time. And the whole thing is like just do more planning and you'll end up doing less stupid shit. And so for me, I found that every week I've blocked off time on Friday. Friday for me is like, some people call it like creator day, right? Or CEO day, or like I don't take any meetings except for one. I have one planning meeting, and the rest of the day, nothing else like formal. And scheduled at least in one, if not two blocks of the day is some type of thinking exercise. And usually what I like to do is actually turn to a chapter in that book. And it gives me a framework to work with, because you can just pick up one, right? Stop. All right, great. Here's a great framework for me to think through for the next hour, 2 hours. And I find that sometimes it's hard. I feel like I'm like, you're trying to create something and you're not feeling creative and it just goes nowhere. And when that happens, like I promise myself, I'll give myself an hour, right? And if I go 3, great. Like I won't stop it. If I go an hour, I'm uninspired, I'm not getting anywhere. Like, all right, it's done, I'm good. But putting in that time every single week, I think has been a game changer for me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we'll make sure to link up that book again in the description, which is The Road Less Stupid. If you don't mind, opening up a little, like, can you talk about the last big insight you had from that process and just kind of like what went into that and then so on?
The last big insight from that, I would say a good insight, not the last one, was selling invisible. Right?
Yeah.
Like classic example. And it was like, look, okay, so for us, the that business, its revenue wasn't the primary driver of happiness or value for us, right? It was the positioning of that brand in the marketplace. And it was the data that we had access to by being that brand in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So we're building software, right? AI and big data we talked about a little bit ago, called PPC Predict. It's in beta now, but like we're building the software. It's reliant on that brand, its customers, and the MCC and Google Ads API connections that we have to power the big data and AI and the mathematician on staff to get this thing to market, right? And so like at the same time, like we're in a slog because we're running like that agency, right? We're running another software company that has launched. And we got this one in the backlog that we're working through, trying to get to a stage where we can release it. And we're in that slog for like, it feels like 12 months, like just getting nowhere because we're riding 3 horses, right? Like we're not riding one, we're riding 3. So finally we're like, well, screw it, like we got to get rid of the agency. And the big takeaway was like, we can get rid of the agency, but we got to retain these 3 things strategically, right? We got to retain the customer list, we got to retain the data connections, and we have to have a safe pair of hands to send people after they work with us, because the next thing they're going to ask for is, all right, great, they got a great return on this product. Now, who do I go to run the Google ads after that? So like we needed those 3 things in a buyer, and it was really a very strategic buyer. And we found that buyer. Took us about 4 months. We found that buyer. We're able to exit, take some money off the table, right? And now we're riding, 2 horses, and not just that, but we got rid of like all the big overhead and all the big staff, and let's call it $100K a month in commitment for team members and software and everything else to run that business.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for sharing that. That must have been a nice morning or moment when you came to that conclusion. So that's great. And with that, can you talk about what those projects look like now? Like what you're up to these days?
Yeah. So one piece of software is called PPC Ad Lab, and the other one's called PPC Predict. Both of them I co-founded with my business partner at Invisible PPC, Rob Warner. And both of those we run together with a small team, very, very powerful small team. And it's a lot of fun. So PPC Ad Lab officially turned 1 year old. It was its birthday last month. And this month is its 13th month in business. And we should hit $1 million run rate. So like for a software business, that's crazy. Retention is really good. We found, again, like we hit, almost to your point, like we can almost skip like the product market fit phase because we know the industry so well. And like we can, like, it's not an overnight win. It's not like flipping a light switch, but like we're able to iterate so fast as well based upon customer feedback. So when people become buyers, they do it largely because of the trust that they have in Rob and I, but then very quickly we're able to get real feedback and turn it into a product that it needs to be for like true large scale product market fit. Right. So that one's been really fun. That finds and tracks Google Ads advertisers for marketing agencies. So you can see what's happening in the markets that you're in or your clients are in. And then a lot of people are using it for prospecting too. So let's say that they're a productized agency and they're niche focused and they focus on HVAC companies, right? They'll use PPC Ad Lab to find all the advertisers in a city that are running Google ads and prospect to those people instead of prospecting to the whole yard, right? The 200 HVAC companies in Seattle, right? And use that as kind of a qualifier. And then like we do all the data we collect. Think about like an SEM Rush report or like a SpyFu report, but localized for an industry. We help them kind of create like these benchmark reports that help them then stand out in the marketplace as well. And like we don't take credit for it, right? It's like this is yours, right? This is white labeled. You become the expert. We want you to win, like, and we win by you winning.
Yeah, I love that. And you touched on like an interesting point where like if you were to develop that technology as like a Silicon Valley company or somebody with no connection to that space, you would sort of be forced to like sell to people this new thing that they don't know about, that they don't understand, which means you would probably have to give it away to free or something close to it in order to just test it, which means because people didn't pay for it, they probably wouldn't use it or take it that seriously, versus here, let me sell you this thing, what it's actually worth. And then that client actually uses it, and then you actually get feedback that's real, and then you can keep iterating on it. So I think that's a really good point and is a good argument for why agencies are good fits to launch software. So that's awesome. Joe, how can people follow what you're up to, get in touch, follow the podcast, etc.?
Yeah, so you can go to digitaltriggers.io is where we host the podcast. It's called Show Me the Nuggets. We have a show. We're pushing back the schedule, doing it every 2 weeks now during the summer, and got to spend some more time with the kiddos. And then the other platforms are ppcadlab.com. We have ppcpredict.com, which we talked about a little bit today. And then one that we haven't talked about, which is our reputation management platform, where we're taking on Bird Eye and the other big multi-million-dollar VC-backed companies. And that one's been really fun. That's the latest one that just launched, and that's reviewgrower.com.
Awesome. You're picking lots of fights, man, but I love it.
I like picking lots of fights. I like being the underdog in the market. I like going to bat for agencies. I like becoming a better solution that fits them better and focusing on them. You know, that's me. That's who I was. That's like talking to myself, 5 years ago. So really, really enjoyed the marketplace.
Awesome. And we'll get all that linked up. And Joe, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Dan. Thanks for having me on, man.